A few updates. Karen's not feeling well. Amanda's not feeling well. Lillian tested positive for strep. We're 24 hours past antibiotics. Doctor said she's no longer contagious, don't worry. But then Charlie was getting a little puny, and Madison gave him Benadryl. And so we figured, just let him go to sleep there, right? So hopefully his is just allergies.
We kept Benadryl or let him listen to you preach.
Yeah, hey, one of the two will do it. One of the two will do it. Hopefully, we kept them separate after Lillian got sick. So hopefully he won't get strep. Glad Sherry's back. And let me see. Anybody know about Miss Janice Lowry? Usually she watches online, but she's not here.
I just got here.
Yeah, see, he's already asleep, and I just started.
Just a half dose on it.
So I asked about Karen being sick, and Justin's dad, Rick, said, "I heard she was sick of Jonathan." So put me in my place real early, real quick, fast, in a hurry tonight. Okay, I think you're right. And we're glad that the Burnses are back. Sounds like they had a good trip this past weekend. All right, let's not forget to get the cards, the flyers for the singing. Pass those out as much as you can. And make plans to be here. That's next weekend. That is coming up on us quick. So we'll be looking forward to that. All right, we'll have a prayer, and then we'll sing our song and go to class. Wonderful God and Father in heaven, we are so thankful for all that you do, for who you are, and for what you have done for us. We are thankful for this opportunity we have in the middle of the week to gather together, to encourage one another, to strengthen one another, to study your word, to be together for just a few minutes. Help us to take advantage of this time together as we spend time learning about you, and as we spend time thinking about one another, praying for one another, and doing what we can for one another. Be with those that we've mentioned as being sick. Be with those who are traveling. And may everything we do tonight be pleasing to you. May it be encouraging to us. And may your name be glorified. It's in your Son's holy name we pray. Amen. When I started the prayer, I was going to announce... So James was on the freshman baseball team at Moody High School this year. And on Monday afternoon, two of his teammates that are twin brothers, Ray and Lee Prater, their dad had a massive heart attack and died. Oh, no. And oddly enough, it's the second dad on the team that died this spring. You knew the other one, Justin. And so the husband and wife, Kevin, is his name, Kevin Prater. He and his wife Lisa, they had gotten married a little bit later. They had had kids a little bit later. But he passed away on Monday. And so you can imagine the difficulty they're going through now. He was fully devoted to those boys. So if you don't mind keeping the Prater family in your prayers as well. All right, our song tonight, I think, will go right along with us finishing up the Ten Commandments, so we'll sing this song together. Oh, to be like thee, blessed Redeemer, this is my constant longing and prayer. Gladly I'll forfeit all earth's treasures, Jesus thy perfect likeness to wear. Oh, to be like thee, oh, to be like thee, blessed Redeemer, pure as thou art. Come in thy sweetness, come in thy fullness, stamp thine own image deep on my heart. Oh, to be like thee, full of compassion, loving, forgiving, tender and kind. helping the helpless, cheering the fainting, seeking the wandering sinner to find. Oh, to be like thee, oh, to be like thee, blessed Redeemer, pure as thou art. Come in thy sweetness, come in thy fullness, stamp thine own image deep on my heart. Oh, to be like thee, lowly in spirit, holy and harmless, patient and brave, meekly enduring cruel reproaches, willing to suffer others to save. Oh, to be like thee, oh, to be like thee, blessed Redeemer, pure as thou art. Come in thy sweetness, come in thy fullness, stamp thine own image deep on my heart. Go class.
Hey, little man, what's that big sound?
I like those hearts on your shirt.
Oh, he's right.
Priest or come up with what's that? There wasn't any priests. Who was a priest? Who were they a priest for? You know, who's talking about?
Do you remember where that was?
So in 19, when he was calling people up.
That do not let the priests and the people break through.
Yeah, and there's other on.
That's interesting. I'll have to check that out.
You don't know?
No. Haven't caught on that one before. You caught me. You got me.
Isn't that curious?
That is. You have that a couple of times, you know, in some stores you even have clean and unclean animals before the rules are even spelled out about clean and unclean animals.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, like in Noah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And so, kind of an interesting thought. I'll have to look at that. That's interesting.
Maybe that was something Moses knew about already, but God told Noah that.
Yeah.
But so he let Noah know that there would be.
Right.
But here he's saying the priests are not to come up.
Right. I don't know. I'll have to look that one up. That's interesting. So James actually reminded me, so the Frater family earlier in the season just lost his last name. The kid's name is Patrick. His dad passed. 2 years ago, a teammate's dad passed, and 3 years ago, a teammate's dad passed. And so there's a small epidemic on this of these freshmen at Moody High School with their dads. It's just absolutely heartbreaking.
For sure, Kevin retired from City Police.
No, Kevin was.
So he got a brother
maybe.
named Prater. His last name Prater.
Yeah. So Kevin worked for Spire, and whatever Spire was before it was Spire.
Maybe it's his brother that retired.
Maybe. Justin, what was Patrick and Park? What was their last name? I know. I did. It did the same thing.
I forgot. I don't remember.
It's got to be his brother because that's Kevin and they look alike.
Oh yeah.
I can't remember the other
Yeah,
brother.
that's Kevin. That's
I can't
Kevin.
remember his brother.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's got to be his brother.
Mm-hmm.
He was a captain at Moody.
So I told Tiffany, I'm just sharing this with y'all. I was doing some work in the backyard. I had a bush that was just a mess, and I had a bright idea that I could efficiently clean up that bush I'll set it on fire. And almost burned down the fence. But there was a second bush that I cleaned the old-fashioned way. It took much longer to clean that bush up. Well, I've got nothing bad happened. It was a lot of smoke though. I've got it out, and I hear sirens, and I'm thinking, oh boy, someone's called the fire department. And I'm laughing with Tiffany, embarrassed that I did something so dumb. I'm like, oh, they're here for me. They're here for me. Well, later I found out they were for that family they live in our neighborhood. And I told Tiffany, boy, I wish they had come for me. Boy, I wish it had been me and not for him. So that's kind of been on our minds this week, and I know that you'll be willing to pray for that family, the Prater families. All right, we started the Ten Commandments on Sunday. We went through the first 4, and those are the ones that are really, if you break it down, those are the ones that are more related to God in their base nature. In their basic nature, and we can summarize all the law, right, in the 2. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is likened to it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And so that's 1 through 4, and then 5 through 6. 4 and 6 is how they break up there. I gave you this graphic just to kind of help us out a little bit, how they can kind of be summarized. The 613, you can kind of summarize by the 10 Commandments, and in the 10 Commandments you can further do that. And do you remember what Jesus says about these 2? On these 2 commandments, what?
And all along.
And the law and the prophets, right. And so, there's obviously more detail, but they can kind of come under that paradigm there. And so I was continuing my reading and studying and came across some things I wanted to share with you. We'll kind of do this almost as review or kind of a secondary introduction. Have you noticed that in the 10 Commandments, there are no punishments listed? Now, he does say about the one who takes the name of the Lord in vain that he will not hold them guiltless, but he doesn't specify a punishment. And you don't get that here. You get, you shall not. And I thought that was very interesting because in a lot of the rest of the laws, you get punishment. He had actually just said, if anyone breaks through and touches the mountain, what do you do with them? Shoot him with an arrow. There's punishments here. If a man lies with a man, as with a woman or with a beast, you stone them. And so we have punishments, but in the 10 Commandments, these aren't listed. And I thought this line was interesting. I quoted from Nahum Sarna last week as well. He says, the motivation for observing the law is not fear of punishment, but the desire to conform to the will of God. I like that. It's not that we're just trying to avoid hell, right? Now, don't get me wrong. None of us here want to go there, right? In fact, we may be spurred on towards Christianity. We may be spurred on even towards baptism by a fear of hell. But as we grow, as we mature as Christians, hopefully, and the Jews would have wanted this, the Israelites would have wanted this, it's not just about staying out of hell, it's becoming more like God. Paul says that the most important thing to him is to know Jesus Christ, to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. He doesn't say, well, I just don't want to go to hell. There's more to it than that, and we see a little bit of that here, that we are learning who God is in these laws, especially in these 10 Commandments. So I thought that was very interesting there. These laws are national, communal, and individual. The nation has to keep them. The tribes have to keep them. The very individual has to keep them. And when these laws are broken, it undermines society. And you think about that, you see that especially with the 6 we're going to talk about tonight. When you commit adultery, you're not just wronging your spouse, you're wronging your neighbor. And when you do that, society breaks down. If everyone was just doing that, seems like that's what we're getting to today a little bit, society will break down. And so we see the scope of these laws is from the individual all the way out to the entire nation. And I didn't know this. I thought this was fascinating. Ancient societies did not disseminate their laws. You can get online and find access to all of our laws, our Constitution, all of that kind of stuff. The Mesopotamians, they had this big yearly festival. Do you know who had the rules for this festival? The priest, and that was it. The law codes in the city of Athens were held by the elite, by the nobility. This was not regular information. And yet, what is the principle taught in the Old Law, in the Old Testament?
Teach them to your children.
Yeah, teach it to everybody. And what was the priest? We think a priest is offering sacrifice, and sure, that could be their primary job. What's their secondary job? To teach. And this was supposed to be well known. All right, now think forward 1,500, no, more than that. I guess 3,000 years, because this would have been about 1440, somewhere around 1440. Think to 1500 AD, and the trouble that men like William Tyndale and others get into for translating the Bible into the common vernacular of the day. Because the priest held what? If they know the Word of God, if they are the only ones that can read it, they have the power, right? And so you almost see them actually going the wrong direction. When God says, no, read it, know it, enjoy it, love it, meditate on it, read it every 7 years. The king even needs to make a copy of it for himself. And so I thought that was really interesting, that in these other societies, the law was held by the elite, whereas God wants everybody to know. Now, not everybody is going to be able to read it, but they can be taught it by the priest. So just some things that I learned while studying for this and preparing for this. All right. We talked about this on Sunday. I went back and read part of the article that I referenced by David McClister. He goes all the way back to creation, as you would. And what is the last thing God does before he rests on the seventh day? He creates man. He creates man in his own image, and then God rests. Well, who does God then get to rest with? He rests with man. And that's the point of Sabbath. Is not just, I don't have to work today. Isn't that nice? It's about relationship with God. And Moses delivers them into the promised land, and yet that relationship with God is not all it should be, is it? There's like this distance between God, even though he kind of dwells in their midst. Well, as we get closer to the final judgment, we see us getting closer and closer in relationship to God. And so we don't celebrate weekly Sabbath. We should have regular Sabbath rest with God, though, in that we have that relationship with him. Already did that, already did all that. All right. Commandment number 5. Honor your father and mother, that it may go well with you, or that you may live long in the land. And I've always laughed about this. The reason that line is given is because if a man doesn't or isn't obedient and honoring his father and mother, what does the law prescribe? Stoning.
Kids didn't think that was fun.
Do what?
Kids didn't think that was fun.
Well,
Oh, that was bad, tough. I said, let me show you something.
There's a show, Big Bang Theory, if you know it. Sheldon is quite the eccentric, and he says, I'm not saying that we should flog all old people who struggle with technology, but if we made an example of one or two of them, it'd give the rest of them reason to try harder. And that's the principle discussed here. And Justin, and I'll use our kids because I have used our kids before. If you take my James out and stone him, what do you think Coleman's going to do? He's going to zip it up, isn't he? He's going to be a little bit better. You see this when they're running around. I don't have to yell at Justin's kids. You know what I do? I yell at my kids. And his kids get quiet. And it's kind of funny how that happens. We were at lunch on Sunday, and I heard this awful noise coming from the end of the table. I thought it was Charlie, and I turned around to yell, not really yell, just get onto him. And there was Brenton standing in his chair, screaming at the top of his lungs. I was like, yeah! Justin, get your kid. And this is discussed over here in Deuteronomy 21, verse 18. If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or his mother, and though they discipline him, will not listen to them, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of the city at the gate of the place where he lives, and they shall say to the elders of his city, this our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of the city shall stone him to death with stones, so you shall purge the evil from your midst, and all Israel shall hear and fear. And so, yes, this is a punishment to the rebellious child, but it's also designed to do what?
Teach.
To teach, to deter. Now, we'll look at the commandment about murder in just a minute, and I know Richard dealt with capital punishment in his lesson, and there's no more questions about that to be had. But part of the problem with capital punishment now is the length of time between a crime being committed and the time it being carried out. It's no longer a deterrent. Used to, when they slammed the gavel down and took you out back to the courthouse and did away with you, and the entire community saw it, what are people thinking? I ain't gonna rob a stagecoach. It's a deterrent. My siblings constantly say that I never got spanked. Guys, I remember very clearly getting spanked, okay? What my siblings don't realize is that I was just smarter than them, and I watched them get in trouble, and I didn't do the same dumb things they did, or I didn't get caught. Maybe the better idea there. Well, that's the point here. But I want you to notice something about the parents, though. What kind of parents are these? They're faithful parents. They're dutiful parents. They have disciplined him. They have done what they're supposed to be doing, and he is still not who he should be. This is the exception to the rule that's given in Proverbs. Bring up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. They have trained up this child to the best of their ability. He's just rebellious. And so this one is to be taken out and stoned. Who is of not doing this in the Old Testament story, famously or infamously?
Samuel.
And
Eli.
Yeah, both of them. Eli, it seems to maybe make a little bit bigger issue out of the Eli story, but yet Samuel's boys are unfaithful too. And Eli gets on to them, but they don't listen. What was his next move? Should have been this. And Samuel as well, especially because they're priests. Samuel is a prophet. Who better to make an example out of? Now, obviously, I'm saying this as I don't have to take my child out and stone him. But that's what they were called to do. And we see when they don't do it, we see what happens. Now, nowadays, our problem is less with the rebellious children and more with this line right here. You have children who aren't disciplined.
And you have to look also at the totality of what this is. This isn't just some kid who doesn't, you give him a deadline and he misses it.
Right.
This is a kid, and more likely a grown.
Yeah, sounds like a grown man. Yeah.
This isn't a 10-year-old.
Right, getting drunk.
Yeah. He's stubborn, he's rebellious, he's a glutton, he's a drunkard.
Yeah, this is a pattern of life.
This is a guy who is beyond redemption.
Yep.
And yeah, he's not your 15-year-old.
Right. Absolutely.
That you've had to discipline.
Absolutely.
It's something to bear in mind.
Absolutely. Have y'all ever seen any parents that have a child? It doesn't matter how they discipline them. They've tried everything, and the child. I feel sorry for those parents. I know of a family. I won't tell you who they are, but I see them, and they are trying their dead level best. They've tried everything. And this kid, he's going to jail at some point in his life. And it's not his parents' fault. I can tell you that they're trying. And your heart breaks for those situations. But there was a remedy for this. And the simple fact goes back to this honoring your father and mother, because that's just naturally what it should be. Do you remember one of the passages or one of the lines in Romans 1 when he talks about all these unnatural sins? Disobedient to parents. It's just how it happens. Justin and I have been talking about this a lot lately. And we sound like old men when we start in on it. But this generation that does not respect authority. I can see right next to him, I can guarantee you Rick spanked him. Am I right? Okay.
She spanked me too.
Oh, hey, there you go. There you go. With a ping pong paddle. And so if I have a boss, I remember going to work at my first job. There were the 2 owners of the restaurant and there were 3 managers. Guess who I listened to? All of them. And so you have this simple recognition of authority. I'm getting hyped up on this. In Matthew 15, verse 4, for God commanded, honor your father and your mother, and whoever reviles father or mother must surely die. Pretty strong language there. You see this referenced here. Matthew 19, verse 18, he said to him, which ones? This is when he says, what commandments must I keep? And Jesus said, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, honor your father and your mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. We'll come back to this verse a number of times today. And then in Ephesians 6, at verse 2, honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise. And then Colossians 3, verse 20, children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. If this is not just an accepted principle of life, chaos is going to explode everywhere. And with some of the societal things you see, with parents having to be very careful about how, listen, you don't just yank your child up and beat them at Publix anymore, do you? You know? I saw a thing that said, you know what the problem of spanking children at Publix is afterwards finding out where their parents are. I thought that was pretty good. You got to be careful about that today.
Looking at this, where it is in the timeline and in the family, I see a greater commandment here. And why this? Why did God put it in here then? If a child does not honor his father and mother, and if his father and mother don't discipline him when he does commit error, and then that child is not going, if he want to obey somebody that he can see, he's not going to obey somebody that he does not see. And it's the same principle. You've got the father and mother discipline, try to get the kid right, and if he doesn't, take him out to the elders, and if he still don't straighten him, they put him to death. Well, the same thing goes with God the Father. He will discipline his children when they go into error. And if they don't repent, their ultimate end will be death.
Right.
Same thing going on.
I'm glad you brought that up. That's the last thing I wanted to say before we go on. It is not just obey me because I am the almighty paterfamilias. And I regularly tell my children I have to discipline them. My job is to teach you what obedience means so that as you grow, you can be obedient to God. You know what that looks like. That's my job. And you're exactly right. So it's more than just obeying father and mother, because that is a shadow of a bigger relationship. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. All right. Commandment 6: you shall not murder.
Commandment 7.
Yeah. All right, you got it. Commandment 7. some people actually try to make a distinction between, or some people exchange the word murder here for kill. And that gets into discussions of capital punishment and military service, police service, those kind of jobs. The term is the unlawful taking of life, is what's being discussed here. Now, we can discuss those other things, but that's not what this passage is talking about. This passage is talking about the unlawful taking of life. Whether you extend it to the New Testament or not, the Old Testament very clearly tells them at times they were to, in fact, kill. We just looked at that drunken 10-year-old that David was talking about that needs to be taken out and stoned, right? And then, you got this passage that I'm assuming y'all would talk about when you taught that day, Genesis 9, verse 6. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. God is the authority of life. God is the author of life. He holds life in his hand. And who lives and who dies is up to God, not me. And therefore, if I kill, well, I've taken God's role into my own hands. Therefore, I have to be executed. I lose my right to life. And that seems to be the principle here. That is God's domain, not mine. Now, remember what I said, that if anybody goes against these laws, they're upending society. Yeah. What if you could just kill for no good reason? I mean, how many people would you have killed on the road today just because they cut you off or were driving too slow? Or you don't go up Chalkville Mountain Road to work, do you? Okay. People would be dead all alongside that road. And we don't get to just do that. I never saw the movie. I only know the idea. Did y'all ever see a preview for the movie The Purge? Where basically anything and everything is legal for 24 hours. And it's like, yeah, that's how crazy things happen. And this is obviously, I feel a lot like Richard here. There's commandment number 6. Number 7, let's move along here. Matthew 5, verse 21, you have heard that it was said by those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders is liable to the judgment. And you're like, oh yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. Now, Jesus actually makes this a stricter judgment, doesn't he? Because we don't just deal with the act of murder. We back up to the attitude, the feelings that lead to murder. And so he goes on, but I say to you, do not even be angry with your brother. That you get to this point. Oh, well, I can mistreat him. I can curse him. I can do all of these things as long as I don't snuff out his life. Don't even be angry with your brother is what Jesus says is what's really going on here. Matthew 19, 18 and 19. Again, this is the rich young ruler that comes to Jesus. Which one of these have you done? Hey, I haven't murdered anybody, at least, I've done good, right? But then over in James 2, verse 11, for he who said do not commit adultery also said do not murder. If you do not commit adultery, but do murder, you have become a transgressor of the law. I think he kind of brings this back up in James 4, verse 2. You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. Now, I'm going to ask a question, and I hope you all give me the answer I'm looking for. Do you think the Christians that James is writing to were actually killing their brethren?
No.
I highly doubt it. But what were they doing? Keeping Jesus' teaching in mind. They were hating their brethren and mistreating their brethren. And who's writing this? This is Jesus' brother. And it's funny, or maybe not funny, but it's funny how much he relies on Jesus' actual teaching in the Sermon on the Mount. The parallels between the Sermon on the Mount and the book of James are tremendous. And so that's what I argue is going on here. Not that they were actually killing their brother. You couldn't just kill people. And Christians know you can't just kill people, obviously. But you can treat them so as to have murdered them in your heart, to treat them like that. And so again, Jesus makes this law, the reality of this law, he brings it even closer to home here. Now to commandment 7, you shall not commit adultery. Yeah, we get it. So real quick, what's the difference between adultery and fornication? Just for our biblical terms here, there is a distinction. What's the difference?
Adultery is a married person who
Right.
has a relationship outside of marriage.
Right.
Fornication is between two unmarried people.
Right. Fornication is kind of the more general term. Adultery is when there's married people.
It's kind of like the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's. It's a different disease process, but the outcome is the same.
Okay. I didn't know where you were going with that at first. I was like, well, okay, well, let's see where he's going with it. Yeah, no, I got what you're saying, yeah. And so fornication, the Bible is extremely clear. The sexual act is supposed to be saved for a husband and wife. That's it. That's where it belongs. And sex outside of that, fornication, is not right. And sex between people who are married to other people is even further down that line of trouble. Real quick, who committed this one and this one?
David.
A man after God's heart?
Yeah.
I don't know if that confuses me or comforts me. It confuses me to some extent. But it also comforts me that if a man could do those two things that, boy, let's be honest, if we're ranking sin, that goes right to the top. And God can still look at this man and love him and forgive him and consider him a man after his own heart. Well, maybe Jonathan can make it after all.
You really have three sins bound into one. He coveted somebody else's wife.
Right?
He committed adultery with her, and he murdered her husband.
Yep. Yeah, so you got to add in number 10 here as well. Absolutely. But so we know what's going on here. Jesus, as you have heard, that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. And again, the same as with murder. What did they say? You can do anything up to the point of that activity. And Jesus says, you don't even lust after this woman. It's that time of year, people. You better put your blinders on and just walk like this, right? Keep your head where it goes. Keep your eyes where it goes. Don't even look at her with lust in your heart. Don't even look at him with lust in your heart, because that is basically the idea of what he's talking about here. It's not just the act. It's that indulgence that leads to this act. Again, with the rich young ruler, he's patting himself on the back because he hadn't killed anybody or committed adultery. And then James 2, verse 11, we've already looked at, do not commit adultery. He also said, do not murder. You could flip these around to make the same point that he's making here. I don't really have a lot to say, kind of like Richard. All right, number 8. Any other comments on this one?
Well, I think his point here seems to be, as you alluded to, some folks might congratulate themselves on having not done the really bad one.
Right.
And coveting is kind of a mental thing. And so that doesn't seem as bad as taking out a gun and shooting somebody in the head.
Yeah.
And
You said that with such aggression.
I know. Did I have somebody in mind? But he's saying, it's just like, you can't tell a policeman, well, I may have robbed a store, but I hadn't murdered anybody, so I'm not really a criminal. Well, yeah, you are. You violate the law, you're a criminal. What he's saying here, you violate God's law, whether it's 1 or 100, you stand condemned and have to do the same thing to fix it, or will suffer the same consequence. Yeah. Whether you committed 1 or 100, you're a spiritual criminal.
Right. Do y'all think there might be something in this commandment as to what Victor brought in with the honoring your father and mother commandment?
He
as
says
well?
about committing adultery, if you're going after other gods or going away from God, if you're committing adultery in that relationship.
And you weren't here Sunday, and you still got it before then. I preached on Hosea on Sunday. You're okay, Sherry. You weren't here either. You weren't feeling well. You're all right. No, I think there is something a little bit deeper, though, here, right? Just as the honoring your father and mother is to teach you about this even greater relationship that you have with God is faithfulness in our marriage, not designed to teach us something about faithfulness with God. He is absolutely and completely always 100% faithful to us. And so we are to be with Him as well. And so I think there's something along those lines as well, like we talked about, Richard, in Hosea on Sunday, which you didn't even need that lesson, obviously. All right. Same with number 8, right? Don't steal. If it's not yours, don't touch it. I think maybe some people in Chicago could use this right now, right? David, you said that, well, at least I didn't kill anybody. You're still a criminal. I don't know. The way things are going right now, you can just loot and all that kind of stuff. And the mayor will say, well, it's not that big of a deal. Their youth will be youth. And even Target will say, well, you know, things are kind of bad right now, so we won't worry about if it's not yours, don't take it. How about that? We don't see just a ton of this in the narrative of Scripture, but we do see it referenced by taking advantage of people. And then again, the rich young ruler, Luke 3, verse 14. Soldiers also asked him, and we, what shall we do? And he said, do not extort money from anyone by threats or by false accusations, and be content with your wages. And then Ephesians 4, verse 28. I'd like to give you all the Grant Caldwell version of this one. You ready? Let the thief steal, no longer working with his hands.
Commas count.
Yes, commas count. Dad liked that one, and when Paul would say, I wouldn't have you ignorant, brethren. He loved those two passages. Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor. And I love this. Not so that he'll have what's his, but so that he can do what? That he can give to others. We're no longer, notice what the thief does. The thief goes from taking what belongs to others to taking what is now rightfully theirs and giving it to others. They've gone 180 degrees, and that's what repentance is. So, you shall not steal. Interestingly enough, in the law of Moses, when someone does steal, let me start outside the law of Moses. In other cultures, sometimes the death penalty could be attached to theft. And then what's the famous punishment for stealing? Yeah, cutting off your hand. It's hard to take something if you don't have fingers. Yeah, some cultures still do that. But some cultures did prescribe death for the thief. And that's not ever in the law of Moses. And maybe there's an emphasis on, or a de-emphasis on stuff that we own. Now, in life, there is execution. But I've always found that interesting. If it's not yours, don't take it. It's not that hard. Number 9, you shall not bear false witness. I think we have to be careful in just boiling this down into don't lie. Obviously, lying is wrong. I can give you plenty of passages to talk about that. But that's not just what this phrase means. It is the idea of testimony, of testifying. So if Richard sees a crime and they call him to the stand, he gets up there and says, no, I saw him do that when he's never seen this guy before in his life. It's false testimony. That's false witness. What's the famous Old Testament story involving this?
Jesus before the Sanhedrin.
Old Testament story.
Oh, the Old Testament.
You are right. Nobody? Oh, come on, guys.
What
Old Testament story is famous for having false witnesses?
where Ahab wanted a vineyard.
Naboth's vineyard. Remember, Jezebel goes and organizes this at the feast so that these worthless fellows will say that they heard Naboth curse God. And then setting up the false witness. Now, in the New Testament, obviously, you have that with Jesus, which is funny. They're organizing the false witnesses and still can't get their stories to line up. And you see the condemnation of this again with the rich young ruler. Luke 3:14, the soldiers again do not extort money from anyone by threats or by false accusations, and be content with your wages. We don't appreciate the threat and control that the Romans would have had over the Jews. I mean, they could have just abused them at any point and just walked away. Threatened to blackmail them, that kind of a thing is what John is talking about here. John the Baptist is talking about here. You aren't going to do this. And so we have a connection, I think, to the witness law that's stated throughout the Old Testament, and that's what? Well, how do you confirm a witness testimony?
You have 2 or 3.
Right, you got to have 2 or 3. And even further than that, we talked about it on Sunday when that guy curses God. Remember, they're fighting with one another, and he curses God. What do the people that heard it have to do?
Lay their hands.
Lay their hands on him. You know, it might be a little bit different if you say, hey, I saw him. But when you have to be the one to cast the first stone, like Jesus commands them, when you have to go and physically put your hands on them, when you're the one, for lack of a better term, pulling the switch, it's going to be a little bit different if you're lying, isn't it?
To me, the key difference between and I'll use the word simple act of lying, is when I tell a lie, it's usually to take care of me, to protect me from something I don't want to have to deal with. When I bear false witness, I'm harming somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so it's a much larger issue.
That's a good distinction there, yeah. Both obviously wrong, and so this, I think, would take care of both of those, would it not? Having put away all falsehood. Do not lie to one another. So lying is clearly condemned, but yeah, there's that group aspect of the bearing false witness. There's the other aspect. I think that's a very good distinction there. And then number 10 is kind of interesting because of all the examples that are given. Do not covet. And David has already alluded to it. What's the problem with this law?
You can't see it.
Yeah, you can't see. You can see adultery. That woman was caught in adultery, right? You can see murder. You can realize that someone is bearing false witness. You can't always prove that I'm covetousness or I'm covetous. One thing you can see, though, is how covetousness leads to all these other problems and all these other sins and all these other commandments. You covet his stuff, so you take it. You covet his wife, so you commit adultery. You covet his stuff, so you kill him to take his stuff. Do you see how this, like you see the connection there? And so you have maybe this idea of envy. I don't know if y'all remember, it's been a long time now. I preached a sermon entitled Serving Others in a Self-Centered World. Justin, can you go ring the bell? About the only time you'll ever see me ring a bell on myself. Serving others in a self-centered world. And the first half of the sermon, there's 4 examples in Genesis that says they saw it and they took it. And every time it was sin. They saw and they took. They saw and they took. I guess not in Genesis, because one of the examples is David. David sees Bathsheba and he takes her. Eve sees the fruit and takes it. The sons of God see the daughters of men and they take it. And then Achan in Joshua 2:7, one of those two. Somewhere early in Joshua, Achan sees the gold and I think a coat from Shinar and takes it. And that's the basis of sin. We see something that we don't have a right to, and we take it without thought of anything else.
There isn't a single visible sin that doesn't arise from an invisible.
There isn't a sin.
Every outward sin began with an inward sin.
Okay, I got you. Say the first part again, though. For some reason,
That every sin you can see, a visible sin begins with an invisible one.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Gotcha.
hatred begins with covet. Murder begins with covetousness. Adultery begins with lust.
Right.
So whatever you see was just the carrot was under the ground.
Right.
There was the
Yeah.
sin.
Yeah, it was a symptom of the disease that was already there. Yeah, absolutely. Romans 7, verse 7, it talks about this. What shall we say? Was the law sin? By no means. Yet if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin, for I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. And the point here being that the law was really good at pointing out sin. Might be the only thing it was good at, but it was good at pointing out sin. And then again, James 4, verse 2, that we've already looked at, you desire and do not have, so you murder, you covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. This covetousness leads to all sorts of problems. We probably need to spend more time on the phrase, godliness with contentment is great gain. And that would help us out with that covetousness. I've always had trouble saying that word. That T is a really hard T on the end of that word. And so, all right, that gets us here. I don't know what's on Sunday. Somebody got their book open? What's on Sunday? Is it the Tabernacle? No, it's the Book of the Covenant. Okay, Exodus 21 through 24. So we're going to be all over the place on Sunday. It is a kind of a strange collection of laws. But that section of Exodus is typically referred to as the Book of the Covenant. So we'll talk about that on Sunday. There's some interesting stuff in there, and we'll pick up on that. Thank y'all. Justin, did you feel the power? Good.
You know that the description of the rebellious son, we actually have, and I ran into this before during my career, there's actually a